Hi, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. How's your day going so far?
Solid.
Yeah.
Yeah, how are you?
All right. I'm good.
That's awesome.
I've been seeing some interesting presentations and they connect up in good ways. I bet you some of the people that were in my last panel are going to come to this one too, because they were talking about climate change and things. All right. Let's see. So what have been some of people's favorite presentations so far? Or not? That's okay. I'm outside, and in the last presentation, the sun was like coming full on me and I'm like getting dizzy. And I thought maybe this wasn't such a good idea. So I'm in the shade now, so we should be good. Hi, Carlo. How are you?
Hello, how are you? Good.
Oh, welcome.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'll be interested to hear your presentation, Carlo, because I live in a food desert, so it's quite an issue. Hi, how are you, Josh?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
Very good. We're almost all here. Hopefully we'll have some audience members. We're early though, right? Yeah, we still have 7 minutes, so we're golden. Oh, so have you done this research as part of a senior project or just a class or just for fun? What'd you do?
I started the research as part of one of my honors courses about food politics. And I kind of just built on it since that assignment.
That's great.
So yeah.
That's exciting. It's neat when you can connect things in multiple classes and experiences and develop stuff. What about you guys?
I just did it for fun. I'm interested in different food sources that we have since we seem to be having some systems that are close to collapse. So yeah.
Great.
I chose my topic as part of a senior project. I really didn't have any direction, but I do have a health background. I'm a nurse. So I wanted to do something that would end up talking about public health issues and food, because food is one of my favorite topics ever.
It's huge.
So one thing led to another. And then I went to a dollar store one day to get some stuff and started looking around, started analyzing what the different types of foods are. And
you cannot be healthy if you try it in a dollar store.
It's supposed to be impossible. Feels like.
Yeah, because I live in a small city, so you know, there's not great public transportation. You can get some places on buses, a grocery store on buses, but it's very circuitous. It's not like New York or something where it would be a smooth, straight shot. So it's a huge issue. So Alycia, I was looking at your topic. Have you eaten said insects?
I have not. I've actually been a vegetarian for like the majority of my life.
Oh, okay.
And I just saw that like a lot of people are really hesitant to like even try to start transforming their diet.
Right.
So like in my conversations with other people, I was like, well, like insects are meat. So like, would you try that as like a transitional thing? And people were mostly receptive to it. They were like, sure. So
I don't believe it.
okay. I'm gonna say the majority of people are like, and then I'm like, but really, is it that
Not too
bad? Like, if you just grind them up, like, do you even know?
Yeah, no, that's true.
I think for me, it's the texture or just knowing that I have to eat insects because like I've eaten tripe, I've eaten a lot of other organ meats. And for me, it's the texture more than it is the taste.
That's
The
funny.
taste can be manipulated in hundreds of ways,
Yeah.
but the texture, I think, is a science and an art.
Well, in my presentation, you'll see some recipes that maybe you'll want to try out.
All right.
So
I'll give it a shot. I'll try anything. I might have eaten raw beef one time. I didn't know if the people were jerking my chain about it or, or if it really was. So I'll try pretty much anything. So.
How was that? Raw beef?
Well, I was in Turkey, and so it was very spicy. So you couldn't really tell for sure what it was. And so I asked what the ingredients were, and somebody told me raw beef. So I liked it. It was tasty. I don't know if they were just trying to tease me or what, but it was good. But I can't say I've like sought out making it. But I heard with the insects now, with the craziness of globalization, that you can get like fried insects, like potato chips, like in bags, apparently. So.
yeah, they also make like corn chips that are also like have insects in them.
There you go.
Yeah.
We're going to find all about it. Excellent. So just for the presenters, just to, you guys can each have up to 15 minutes if you would like. And we're just going to go in the order of the program. So that's Josh, Carlo, Alycia, and then Anna. And then would you prefer to have questions in between or at the end?
I like at the end, but.
Any other thoughts?
I wouldn't mind in between just so that the presentations are fresh.
That makes sense.
I'm open to whatever the group wants.
That's right. All right, there are 4 of you. I'm going to make you vote, and you're going to tie because that's how it is. All right. So Alycia and Carlo, what would you say, end or in between?
I don't really see a problem with either, so I guess I'm a pretty bad vote.
All right. So Alycia, you're the tiebreaker. No pressure.
In between.
All right.
Don't hold me accountable for that.
That's right.
Sorry, Josh.
That's all right. We'll be good. And I'll keep the time going. So I'll just give you a heads up in the chat when it's like at 5 minutes left. And so we're going to have about, depending on how long people go, we'll have like maybe 4 minutes for discussion of each person's thing. And then if we have extra time at the over, we can go back. Get my clock set.
And I do want to apologize. I have hiccups right now, and I'm hoping that by the time I present, they'll go away. We'll see.
Like this, you know,
Yeah, I'll hold
start
my
swallowing. You know, we know why. It's not about the presentations. It's about
just regular hiccups.
trying to get rid of them.
I'm doing my best.
That's right. It would be funny what people don't notice. Time.
Hi, Greta.
All right, hello. I'm Dr. Ann Bomberger. I'm the director of the honors program at Gannon University. Welcome to Public Health 2, Sustainability and Food Production. So we're going to just go, and each presenter is going to present, and then we'll have Q&A and present and Q&A. So, and I encourage you, you can write down questions in the chat as you think of them. And then also maybe at the end, if you can try to think about some connecting questions, that would be fabulous. So first off, we're going to start with Josh Arinze. city sustainability, indoor vertical farming to optimize our planet. Thank you.
All right, can everyone hear me fine? All right, welcome and thank you for having me. My name is Josh Arinze. I am representing Salisbury University's Clark Honors College. And today I will be talking to you about the subject of city sustainability, the indoor vertical farming to optimize our planet. Now, words of wisdom dictate that for a traditional system that isn't broken, it's better not to try to fix it. That same adage might crop into your minds when you think about our global systems of food production. Why I'm here today is to show you that with a keener eye, we can see that the cracks are already there. Food security for all of us and the next generations may very well depend on whether we let our agricultural dilemma go untreated today. Here's the outlook. By human and natural processes, land on our planet has been devastated en masse, in many ways irreversibly. These losses could become calamitous to our global supply of nutritious food. The need for interventions, the need for safeguarding the future of food production comes now. A prospect known as indoor vertical farming presents a climate-controlled and land-optimized tool that's potentially replicable on a universal basis. Before you get too excited, know that it's not perfect and has questions involved that we still need to answer, as well as keep asking. But in matters of the stomach, I think we can agree that having more options is certainly better. And though you may have fair skepticism about its high-tech imagination or its electricity price tag, I'm going to illustrate why it can be economically plausible and a very important necessity. Indoor vertical farming can be that support to offer us higher produce quality, more efficiency, and reduce pollution as our planet grapples with farmland degradation and the increasing boom of urbanized environments. So let's start at the top. For those of you who may be wondering, just what exactly is vertical farming? I'll clue you in. Vertical farming really is the tried and true farming that we know and love, just in a different direction. There's a little more to it though, so bear with me on the definition. An indoor vertical farm is described oh so well by the Australian researchers Kurt Benke and Bruce Tompkins as, quote, an urban, indoor, high-rise, climate-controlled factory with renewable energy and recycling of waste, end quote. It's a lot less yucky than that last little bit kind of sounds, I promise you. It's soilless, it's fast-growing, it's capable of growing crops by mist alone, and it may be a savior in our time of need. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about what ecological conditions are forging that need, and what this agricultural innovation can bring to us as very, very, very needy consumers, and the great, ultimately cost-saving outlook that city leaders can expect by investing in vertical farming. Now, as a technological system, vertical farming is pretty cool in its own right, but it's also got some pretty cool people behind it. Here's one of them, Kimball Musk. I'm sure you know of his brother, but he's quite a guy too, and considerably more down to earth. Forgive the pun. Kimball's an investor in Square Roots, a New York City-based company that's one of the key American enterprises pushing forward the vertical farming conversation. While discussing the indoor method, Kimball says, quote, the opportunity we have, the challenge we have in front of us is real food for everyone. And technology now allows it to be delicious, end quote. Across the American continent, there is Plenty, another leading agri-tech company that has its home base out in the Bay Area. One of its founders, Dr. Nate Story, this guy, sees wonders in the form of vertical farms, championing their exceptional level of control and, quote, really consistent production, end quote. He says, quote, as you move higher up levels of control and smaller farms, we can move production closer to the consumer, which delivers value, end quote. If it seems like vertical farmers are kind of control freaks, they are. Consistency goes to the core of everything about the indoor vertical farm formula. And that perfectionism is just the quirk that we need right now. Let's see why. My first point is that global agriculture has seen better days than its current state. Human over-reliance on the ground is reaching the point of no sustainable return. You can blame man-made causes or you can fault natural processes, but either way, there are severe environmental crises that make up those cracks that I was speaking of earlier. Soil depletion, desertification, coastal erosion, and other consequences of climate change are shrinking farmable land dramatically. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization found that, quote, arable land per person is projected to decrease by 2050 to a third of the amount available in 1970, end quote. A critical challenge comes in the form of sea level rise. Amid global warming, lands worldwide on which dwellings and farms are situated have become inundated, forcing large-scale abandonment. Rising seas have become a major concern in various places. Think of the sheer amount of us who reside by a seaboard. April Reese of Discover magazine determined that nearly half of the world's population lives within 93 miles of a coast, a truly arresting realization. Severe flooding has been driving migration inward as more of the planet becomes uninhabitable. Combine that situation with intense drying related to excess heat, shriveling up farmland in a worsening process. Poor polar bear. But something else is happening too, and it's been underway since before we had cars and planes and pipelines. It's urbanization, the ballooning of our cities. The Swedish science scholar Matthew Gentry deemed that, quote, by the year 2050, it is estimated that 70% of the world's population will live in urban areas, end quote. This underscores a trend of global population growth that is projected to continue through the century. More people swells the food demand, and the dwindling field farm system struggles as a result. With less of a resource and more of a demand, we must dare to explore. The agritech farmer Stuart Utter said in his 2020 address for TED, quote, we will need to grow more food in the next 35 to 40 years than in the previous 10,000 years combined, end quote. There it is, the hard pill we all must swallow. So what current prospects do we have to ensure that food needs will be satiated? Well, vertical farms look promising, but what exactly does that look like? Vertical farms commonly use a hydroponic system, where soil is replaced by nutrient-rich water. This operates along what is called the nutrient film technique, NFT, where water is pumped through a channel underneath the plant's roots, flows downward, collects in a lower reservoir, and finally is returned to the top level to redistribute nutrients. The implication of this recycling is greatest when you consider the water demands that field farming carries. Oda found that, quote, the agricultural industry is the single largest consumer of fresh water, accounting for 70% of global use, end quote. Saving resources at this level is pivotal. Added efficiency like this is crucial to vertical farming's profile as an optimized model, which brings me to my next point. The merits of this novel approach. We can see maximized yields, avoidance of pests and pollutants in the absence of soil and outside air, improved farm to plate speeds, higher produce quality and preservation. This is just all in terms of the crops themselves, not yet even considering the environmental benefits. we've seen a range of grains that can be cultivated in vertical farms, including staples like lettuce, tomatoes, potatoes, soybeans, onions, and kale. That range expands on with the help of brands like Impossible Foods, catering to meat lovers' unique taste, thanks to vertically farmed burgers and sausages. These farms can raise our produce supply in astounding ways. The publication Venture City learned that the New York City-based grower Aero Farms can, quote, grow more than 390 times more crops per square foot than traditional farms, end quote. Aero Farms uses a special method in their vertical farms where crops are misted at the plant's roots. This improves oxidization at a bare minimum water usage. It's an illuminating milestone, but by no means an isolated one. My next point is on the potential to generalize that success to a global stage, answering issues shared amongst our ecosystem. The cost and toll of high reliance on importing food is a thorn in the side of city governments in places like Singapore, Hong Kong, and Honolulu, all of which are land limited and coast susceptible. The expansion of vertical farms could be crucial to cutting down on the long distance, pricey transportation of produce and its resulting pollution. Gentry noted that the compatibility of our burgeoning megacities to the vertical farm formula. He explained this with the quote, in areas in which there are many job and business opportunities that have a developed industry and a denser population, the likelihood of people eating local crops is high, end quote. Vertical farm infrastructure not only shortens the supply chain, but it also preserves the nutritional quality of crops for consumers in the process. Now, in our world of ever rising health consciousness, this is a major asset. A remarkable way that vertical farming's reach can be broadened is through the Open Agriculture Initiative. This developing tool would give farmers everywhere a digital library by which they can simply download the specific conditions of each plant and cultivate it, utilizing a vertical farm's climate-controlled enclosure. Needless to say, open agriculture could very well create a stable worldwide supply of crops at a level beyond any previous imagination. Indoor vertical farming has mysteries that will require diligent effort to be answered, and it could take generations to supplant conventional farming as a standard method. But to conclude, you can see that its treasures right here and right now are amongst us, transforming our spaces of daily living and our spaces of working into a versatile, sustainable havens. To conclude, this wild utopian vision is actually gaining ground, and the sky is our only limit. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Let's give a round of applause to Josh. Yes, excellent. Very good. Questions for Josh? I'm having trouble seeing people, so just go ahead and unmute if you have a question. Sorry.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So one thing I always wondered about vertical farming was whether the crops have equal or similar nutritional content to naturally grown crops. Is that the case, or have you done any investigation into that topic?
So you're saying, do they have like a good platform to naturally grow crops?
More of like, if you have a vertically grown tomato, would that have the same nutritional content as a tomato grown in a farm?
Yeah, that's a very common question that consumers are asking. It's one of the questions that's kind of a little bit limiting the spread of vertical farms, but it is actually a myth that vertical farms are like genetically modified, like the crops. in actuality, they have the same nutritional content, if not better, because they're going through a different method of growth that's avoiding some of that pollution that I was talking about exists in soil farming. In those climate controlled facilities, the plants are getting the absolute best treatment that they can to get the maximum quality and purity. So it's actually not a detriment. If anything, it's only an advantage.
I have a question. I'm sorry. So I'm wondering if there's been a lot of research lately on the benefits of certain microbes for crops. I'm wondering if you came across anything for integrating those microbes into vertical farming systems, because if they don't have contact with the soil, then they're not going to necessarily be having those interactions naturally unless we add them. So I'm just wondering if you came across anything like that, or like how microbes might fit into vertical farming.
That's definitely an interesting question from like you mentioned, the science of the growing process. Now, for the companies that are kind of leaders in the industry right now, as I mentioned, Plenty and AeroFarms. Now, in their published results of their harvest, they haven't really mentioned any sort of deficiency coming up with those lacks of microbes. So it is a question of how that maybe can be explored further as the industry expands. But these projects are going out on the market in some of those cities that I mentioned, Singapore, New York, Hong Kong, and they have not really found any sort of lacking in the absence of those microbes. So I think it's just not a priority for them at the moment.
All right, thank you.
I have a question. Hi, Josh. Thank you for the presentation. It was awesome. So my question is about, you mentioned when vertical farming happens, the plants are misted at the root versus like a more traditional overhead. Like I was thinking about rain and the way that that mimics nature. So I was wondering if there were any like similarities or differences to how vertical farming kind of mimics nature's patterns of how plants grow. Because whenever I think of innovative technologies and sustainable technologies, I always think of how they mimic natural processes. So wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, so the hydroponic system that uses NFT, as I was talking about, it is like remarkably reminiscent of soil growing, even though, you know, it is lacking some of those like really microscopic contributors to the growing process. Just the recycling of the nutrients in that system still manages to be close to the growing process. Somehow it's actually surprising how the crops end up coming out tasting more full. At least that's how they're described, tasting richer, less diluted. Now the system you were talking about with the misting, that's known as aeroponics. And to me, that seems like completely different than soil growing, you know. But you know, if you compare the two, hydroponics and aeroponics, we're actually seeing aeroponics be more effective, which is really impressive and inspiring because it saves a bunch of water, you know, just by using mist. So I think we're headed in the direction where aeroponics is going to become more of the standard, and I think that's a good thing. Without, you know, forgetting the past with the soil process, but we still get to reap those benefits.
Thank you very much. Let's go and move on to Carlo's presentation now.
Can everyone hear me? All right. All right, so my topic for this presentation today is Food Royale, which is a play on the Battle Royale game scene, about how groceries and dollar stores and their competition for precious consumer dollars. My name is Carlo. I'm from Macaulay Honors College. And I want to start off this presentation with some food for thought. So questions like, do you do grocery shopping? Where do you go? How far is it from your house? How do you get there? And how much time do you spend shopping for groceries? Those seem like really simple questions, but the implications behind the answers to those questions is actually quite profound and quite systematic for millions, if not everyone, on Earth. Um, I want you to consider how dollar stores are. How have you ever been to a dollar store? How do they look compared to other groceries, where they're situated, um, and whether you notice anything different about them in their products as compared to grocery stores. Another consideration is whether you know what makes food healthy or unhealthy, whether you consider those same factors when you look for food at grocery stores, and what are ways in which people may have trouble finding healthy food at grocery stores or being able to afford them. To start this conversation, we should first look at what dollar stores are compared to supermarkets, convenience stores, and grocery and bodegas. So supermarkets are traditional grocery stores. They can comprise big chains like Stop and Shop, ShopRite, Wegmans, which contain usually everything. They have vegetables, fruits, the same snacks that are mass produced. They can have hot prepared food in the back. They have a deli, and they'll often have a lot of other goods that you need for your house. Dollar stores, on the other hand, are places where you usually find snacks, some essentials like laundry equipment, tools, uh, school supplies, and kitchen utensils and things like that. They're usually of lower quality and they're made to be just a bare minimum that people need. And a lot of the products in there can contain very bad products such as high fructose corn syrup or MSG or other unregulated products, even though that they may claim that those products are not inside the goods in dollar stores. Convenience stores, on the other hand, are places which are very close to consumers. The places where people often go to buy like a snack or a pick me up to go to work. Some places can sell produce, but it's often at marked up prices or very close to retail, but often higher. And they're very convenient for people, as it says in the name, but things tend to be a lot more expensive. Bodegas are a very New York specific thing. They're very similar to convenience stores, but they also tend to have a deli where someone cooks hot prepared foods. And most of the time they sell a little bit of everything, just like groceries do. It's important to know that these types of stores, even though it just looks like a place where people buy stuff, have very different implications because of their location, their centrality or decentrality, and the types of foods that are being sold at these places can differ in nutritional content, and therefore it does have an effect on people's health. I want to start my health discussion about what makes something healthy versus unhealthy. Basically, nutrient-dense foods tend to be foods that are very healthy because they contain a lot of nutrients, such as your minerals, your vitamins, a healthy amount of sugars and fats and proteins in nice proportions. These are items like vegetables like broccoli, or a dish that contains maybe about 50% sugar, 25% protein, 25% fat. These are foods that people should be eating so that they maintain a well-balanced diet. Calorie dense foods tends to be food that has a lot of calories, therefore energy, and it'll give people the energy that they need to do the work for the day, but doesn't come with a lot of nutrients such as vitamin A, C, E, and the B complex, and also tends to have a high sodium or fat content in order to provide satiety. A lot of these foods have empty calories, and in this example, the soda is a very typical empty calorie example because it's 150 calories, and all you're getting is a lot of sugar, possibly high fructose corn syrup, and a lot of random salt like potassium, and a lot of acid. According to the DGA, which is the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, they come up with a report every 5 years. Americans tend to be consistent about not eating well, and there's a lot of implications for this. The federal government always comes out with a food report about the people's access to to groceries and to healthy, affordable food, and to assess whether people are dying more or less from certain preventable diseases like obesity, heart disease, hypertension, and other such conditions. A lot of people have different reasons for not eating completely healthy. Some of these perceived reasons are, one, in schools, there's a lot of competition, and at work, there's a lot of vending machines as well. Vending machines tend to be places where unhealthy foods and snacks like your typical chips or candy or sweets are predominant. So they often win in a nudging competition, marketing competition to kids and adults alike. A lot of places such as dollar stores and convenience stores often don't have produce at reasonable prices, if any at all. Many dollar stores are closer to people than grocery stores, but they don't sell any produce, so there's a lower chance of people going to grocery stores to buy fresh produce and healthy foods. Some poor families may have disrupted family dynamics, so they may work 2 jobs, they may have very long work days. Instead of like 8 to 12 hours, they may have 12 to 16. So they don't have time to sit down at the table and eat with their whole family if they have kids. They don't have time to cook, so they always buy fast food, or they buy something pre-prepared, which often isn't so healthy. And of course, there's cultural preferences, which may not always align with the food available at the stores near them. So maybe a family from Eastern Europe might not be so keen to eat tacos all the time, or maybe a person from an Asian descent may not be able to eat cereal and milk all the time because it's just not in their preferences. The biggest barrier to eating healthy is still cost, even though there may be many people that argue that healthy eating does not necessarily mean buying expensive food, and that it is possible, but cost is also not just a monetary factor, it is also a matter of time, because making healthy food can cost a lot of people's time. So it could be hours of marinating, prep time, boiling and braising, and sometimes there's just no time in a 24-hour workday to be able to do that. So groceries and dollar stores are fundamentally fighting each other on being able to get the same money from consumers for food. But the problem is that grocery stores are at an unfair disadvantage compared to dollar stores. Some of these reasons are how groceries tend to be in a central location so that they draw a lot of people for their small margins. Dollar stores and convenience stores are just way more dispersed in any given place, especially in food deserts. A lot of the food that is sold in dollar stores and convenience stores tend to be chips, snacks, and things with high energy content. So they offer satiety for the person, but then it's very short-term energy, so they crash right afterwards and are often left reeling for more energy. And of course, a lot of poor minority populations live in food deserts. And this is where dollar stores and corner stores are very, very prevalent, to the point where you might not see a grocery store for another 30 minutes to an hour, which would contain fresh produce. This quote from Alison Carpin, PhD, quote, "Our research found that about 60% of dollar store shoppers come from households with incomes less than $50,000 a year, and 30% earn less than $25,000 a year," highlights how a lot of impoverished populations tend to not have enough money to buy wholesome foods and to buy in bulk, which is normally cheaper. And therefore, they have to resort to buying short-term cheap snacks, like ones that are about $1 or less. And it looks cheap for them in the short term, but then in the long term, it harms their health. These two maps show the ubiquity of dollar stores in often a southern Midwestern area. This one is Atlanta, Georgia. You can see here that Family Dollar, Dollar General, and Dollar Tree, which are 3 of the largest chains in the United States, have greatly increased in ubiquity over the last decade, especially after the 2008 recession. And in the same population, there's also a lot of minority populations. So you want to keep in mind how populations dollar stores are often correlating with minority populations as if they were targeting them. It's, from what I said before, it is clear that dollar stores are just outcompeting grocery stores in many respects. So it it sounds like businesses are just taking advantage of competition, but it's at the point where it's actually harming public health because of its long-term effects of unhealthy food. That's the biggest point in this scenario. There's been a lot of pushback locally. So a lot of cities and government programs are in place, such as SNAP, which is the food stamp program that's been around for decades. And food stamps generally have a stigma because of the connotation that poor people or people that need food stamps tend to be people that deserve to be poor because they've made bad choices, but that's almost clearly not the case in most of the research I've ever read. One more notable program is Double Up Food Bucks, which essentially doubles the amount of vegetables you can get with your food stamp money. That's a really great step towards incentivizing fresh fruits and vegetables economically. Structurally, officials have started to look at how dollar stores could be limited because there's just so many popping up. I think over 10,000 stores popped up in the last 8 years. And there's another one at the top left in New Orleans where the government has started to subsidize corner stores and making it easier for them to find fresh produce supply chains in order to compete and be able to supply fresh produce to locals. Some of the other solutions we've highlighted are promoting local farmers markets, making sure that small business stores like mom and pop stores are more empowered and that they're promoted instead of subsidizing big businesses. Making specialized health education more present for different cultures is very important. So taking into account how different populations may have different spice preferences or intolerances or needs like halal or kosher foods are very important, and I think would really go far towards helping poor populations have a higher quality of life than they do now. And one last thing is using dollar stores in this fight. While I do phrase it as a battle royale of sorts, it doesn't necessarily have to be a competition between groceries and dollar stores. They can work together by being able to sell fresh produce more locally, especially dollar stores. Now that there are policies in place by Dollar General, for example, to sell fresh produce in more places, they've seen a wide range of success. And one way to help facilitate that is to make sure that produce is going to dollar stores as well, or if not mandating them. All in all, it's really nice to take a perspective to see how poor people are not necessarily deserving of their poor status. Some people are just trying to get by, and if we give them the tools to do it, they will try. I think it's always good to have a notion of goodwill when we're discussing economic mobility rather than placing the blame on them and making people compete with each other for basic necessities. Thank you.
Questions for Carlo?
Yeah, Carlos, great job on your presentation. Yeah, I think about the issue you're talking about, you know, like, and it reminds me of what I hear about like grocery stores, certain chains avoiding neighborhoods, basically, because they feel like they're not going to make profit there. But a lot of those neighborhoods are the most in need. So, like, how do you think this issue relates to social justice and that conversation that we're having nationwide around racial equity and you know, class equity as well?
That's a really great question, and I really appreciate you bringing that up because when I was doing more research into where dollar stores build their stores, there's often this term redlining that's used, which is used in to discriminate against minority populations, especially when trying to build credit. And this kind of applies to grocery stores and dollar stores as well, because dollar stores are inherently using these minority and poor populations to gain profit, with the guys that, oh, you know, they're just marketing to the fact that there was a recession and there's a demand for it. But while they are, and that's not their fault, they're also inherently creating a cycle of constant short-term satiety instead of long-term health. And that is a very fundamental issue that I frankly don't have a super solid answer for. And I think it's very systematic more than it is individual. I think that's the direction of the conversation, is that it has to be something has to be done centrally, and not blame it on individuals or businesses.
It's okay if you don't have any research about this, but have you looked into it all, the role of community gardens? You know, I'm thinking about Josh's presentation about hydroponic gardens, but there are more community gardens that are cropping up in cities to help with the sustainable, you know, healthy foods.
I did not consider that, but when we were going through Josh's presentation, I was extremely inspired. I think vertical farming and having local farms in cities is a really interesting way to think about solving the issue of how produce is generally shipped from thousands of miles or hundreds of miles away from the destination. And by using local foods, local produce, you can actually help local cities in addition to providing the produce to local populations. So there's like a win-win type of interaction there that governments could possibly explore. But I would love to do more research on that.
All righty, thank you. So we'll go on to Alicia's Hancock's presentation, how insects could transform the US food system.
Hello. So my name is Alycia Hancock. I'm a sophomore biology major at Notre Dame of Maryland University. I'm representing our Morrissey Honors Program today, and I want to delve into how insects could transform the US food system. Oop, if my slides will work. Oop. So sorry. So to outline my argument, we're going to be looking at how our current food supply is unsustainable for the future of our species and the environment as we know it. Then we're going to be looking at the environmental impact of rearing the insects and what all goes into it, because it's not really clear at this point. And then we're going to be seeing how insects can be used as human food and can be a more sustainable feed supply for larger populations than the current livestock and agricultural practices of today. So the US food system is a major contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions. They're produced at all stages in the system, from farming and its inputs to food distribution, consumption, and the disposal of waste. So we're mainly going to be focusing on the farming aspect of the food supply. And with the progression of global climate change, it is expected that there are going to be greater stresses put on our food supplies. So we need to focus on where the food is coming from and how that impacts our environment, because if we don't address that, we're not going to see change. So one of the stressors that's going to be put on our food supply is going to be the size of the population. By the year 2050, the United States population is expected to increase by 42%, contributing to a global population of 10 billion. And to support this growth in population, food production is expected to increase by 70% by that same year, meaning we'll need to become more efficient in the use of our natural resources and the rearing of our animals for consumption. However, today we're seeing animals being pushed to their biological limits. We see chickens that are bred to have breasts so large that they can't even stand on their own 2 feet. So we need to find more efficient and faster ways to produce protein, essentially. And it's not only that the current practices of rearing livestock are unsustainable to support human life, but our ecosystems are being destroyed. So livestock production accounts for 72 to 78% of total agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, while the production only uses half of the total land of agriculture globally. So there's some disconnect between how much land they're using and how many emissions they're putting off. It seems to be detrimental to our health. And this production creates not only like a transformation in our landscape and our climate, it's destroying ecosystems. So we can see that through deforestation, overgrazing, and as we've mentioned in previous presentations, the conversion of pasture land to arable land. So we're gonna be seeing this desertification and just the detriment to our land. So just to put it in perspective, we can see that livestock here represent 77% of our agricultural land used globally, but they only supply about 18% of our global caloric supply. So we're not using this efficiently, and we can find something to do better, essentially. And I just want to bring this home, put it into perspective. To raise all of these livestock, we have taken over land roughly the size of Africa. So the problem lies in that the large livestock are often fed on crops that are edible by humans and that require a high proportion of our land and water resources. So if we were to use those natural resources, including both of those that I just mentioned, for a more sustainable meat protein source, we would not be destroying our environment at such a high rate. And this also contributes, industrial farming essentially contributes to transformed habitats, and it's one of the greatest pressures of biodiversity. We can see that of the 28,000 species evaluated to be threatened with extinction on the IUCN Red List, agriculture is listed as a threat for 24,000 of them. So it's not like this is some arbitrary idea or an arbitrary force that's acting upon us. We are doing this to our environment. So I want to talk to you about a solution that we could have, which is the rearing of insects. And I want to talk about the environmental impact of those to see if it could be a viable solution. So insects generally have a much lower water requirement compared to these massive livestock. So one example of insects that we would be eating would be mealworms, and their footprint per gram of protein is 5 times less than that of beef production. And the water footprint will vary based on what insect species you're eating, but they are significantly lower than that of larger livestock across the board. And then there are going to be 3 main strategies of rearing these edible insects. So wild harvesting of these would be going out and hunting for insects essentially, but most scientists agree that that would be detrimental to local ecosystems. So the proposition is to semi-domesticate or farm for these insects, obviously. So semi-domestication and farming could provide it in a more sustainable way, where we would have outdoor farming, where we would introduce a population of native insects that could be controlled and sustained without taking from the local ecosystem, but also without introducing a new and unfamiliar insect that could be a detriment as well. So in this, the land required for rearing them is a fraction of that of livestock, and we're not going to be using as much water either because they're so much smaller, and we're going to see in some upcoming slides. I'll just wait for that. I'm too excited. I'm so sorry. I'm really excited about this. So insect rearing in an industrial setting is found to have emissions of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and ammonia that's significantly lower than that of traditional livestock, which all of these gases are known and notorious for contributing to global climate change. So in reducing these, it's not an end-all be-all, but it is a hope to reel back our effects on the environment. And insects also may be used to mitigate food scraps. So there's a proposition that we would feed insects our organic waste, such as like food scraps from restaurants, and have them in composting piles. And the flexibility in food sources could allow the use, like, ooh, they can be raised on bio waste. Sorry. And it would just be a more sustainable way for our whole cycle to operate. So on that, I would also like to mention that insects as food would not be as dangerous as a lot of people may think. So we may be thinking like, what's in our organic food scraps? Like, how would that translate into our bodies? And the bioaccumulation of toxicants in insects is significantly lower than that in larger like cows, cattle, swine. So we're going to see lower bioaccumulation, and our risk of getting those same toxicants in our system from what we're eating is going to be significantly reduced. The main concern about consuming insects as food is going to be allergic reactions to them, essentially, because many people are allergic to like cockroaches, and we see that with like people who are allergic to chocolate are actually allergic to the cockroaches in the chocolate. So that's just one of many concerns that people may have. So something else that people are often like, they're like, why would you even think of it? Like, why would you even do this? But the feed conversion efficiency of the insects makes them more sustainable. So we're going to see them using significantly less food to make the same amount of product. So you can see here that insects have a 1 to 2 feed conversion ratio range, and cattle and swine have that is significantly greater. So we're going to be using our land, water, and food more efficiently in raising these. And like, yeah, I just think it's so cool. I hope you guys are finding this interesting as well. So most edible insects provide sufficient energy, which is also a concern. So it's not going to be like a fast food. It's not going to be something that's in and out junk food. Like you may think of, like, if you're thinking of eating bugs, you may be thinking about the little candies with the bugs like freeze dried in them. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about them being a supplement in our diet and really helping us out. So for reference, it's very difficult to quantify the level of energy or the specific concentration of nutritional content of edible insects, because there are thousands of species that are like available for us to eat right now. So the profiles depend on the environment and the insect breed themselves, but even the stage of a development can influence like the nutritional value of an insect. So you'll see with like larval stages, they'll have higher concentrations of fat, and that might be beneficial to us since we see like higher amounts of polysaturated fats in them. And those are like the same fats that are found in salmon that are marketed as good for us, as they lower cholesterol and things like that. So I think that's something to put it in perspective, that insects have those same things. And it's also a key concern that they wouldn't have the same elements and vitamins that we need to sustain us as meat. And they do. They actually have a great deal of essential vitamins and minerals, and are known as a complete protein, which is a huge marketing strategy by the meat industry to profit off of beef and other kinds of red meat, which are seen as complete proteins. Insects are also known to boost the immune system and gut bacteria, and they don't seem to contribute to obesity and associated like diseases of it, which are like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, which are sometimes seen with the overconsumption of red meat. And it's good to note that, like, in moderation, food can be safe. So just to like encourage you guys to try this idea, I have included some recipes. So this is essentially a stir fry of some different kind of bugs, as you can see, and I'll send the name of the book in here. It's really awesome. It's by an amazing author in the field. And these are hopper kebabs. And yeah, I just feel that we need larger amounts of sustainably produced nutrient food and that insects could meet that need. And to think about this like globally, we need to think about the origins of our food, because if we're not seeing the impacts, we're not tying that into our daily lives. And that's something that's a disconnect in the United States. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Very interesting. You convinced me to try. Good. All right, good questions that you have.
I do have a question. Your presentation was really, really interesting. I'm just wondering, how do you foresee, I guess, people accepting the idea of eating bugs? Because most people I know are like, ew, creepy crawly, you know?
Yeah,
How?
So we're already seeing in Europe that they're supplementing insects into meat products like sausages and other things. And I think that's a really interesting way to do it. I think that is feasible in the United States because we already supplement them with like cheaper sources of meat and like parts that people wouldn't particularly want to eat. And so I think doing that in a very transparent way could knock off the novelty of it, but also like make it more culturally acceptable, and just making people aware that like this isn't a new idea. This eating insects has been practiced for thousands of years, and the Western world has just deemed it unacceptable. So I think with the multicultural aspect of the United States, and that we are such a diverse country, in time I think we could come to really accept this on a wider basis.
That's really cool. Thank you.
I have a question. So given from the chart on the feed conversion ratios, I noticed that fish have a similar feed conversion ratios as insects, but I've heard that fish also require higher protein sources. What are your thoughts on, especially with the cultural acceptability thing, what are your thoughts on raising insects and using that as feed for like aquaponics or grown fish, that kind of thing? Do you think you could get similar benefits even though it's still going through one more trophic level?
I think that's a feasible idea, and there are parts of my paper that address that and talk about how insects could reduce the methane outputs of even cattle, which is super interesting. So it wouldn't only be for aquaponics. We could supplement the diets of larger livestock animals with insects as protein sources, and it would make them less dependent upon like super processed things that take a lot of energy to produce. So yeah, I think it's really feasible. They're trying to do it in aquaponics now, but I think the push towards getting it into like wider ranges of agriculture should be considered. That was a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. So if you look at the alternative meat markets going on with Impossible Foods or like Morning Star or whatever, veggie burgers. That is really gaining feasibility as a alternative to livestock and traditional farming for meat. So where do you see this coming into interplay with that, and like what longevity do you think that has for the future of livestock farming?
Well, I think with a lot of those products, they are soy based, and America, we're starting to see a lot of monocropping, especially with soy, and that is going to be a detriment to our natural ecosystems. So I think in gearing away from the market of soy products, it would be better for us in the long run to find more sustainable plant proteins that aren't going to create such a like monoculture. And I think the rearing of insects would help in steering us away from that and act as a transitional tool to find better alternatives.
Do we have time for another question? Yeah, cool. Hi, Alycia. I loved the visuals of your presentation too. The bug images were really cute. Great job. So I loved what you said specifically about native species and introducing them kind of like partway into the environment, partway like a human agriculture type thing. So maybe could you just share more about what that looks like? Would it be like locally, like small community gardens doing it? Would there be like large factories full of bugs? Like what's your thinking and vision around that?
Well, there are two different like models for it. So there are like ones that it's essentially a huge outdoor garden where it's like the garden is not the point is the insects, and it's just to introduce those insect populations to harvest. And I think those are more sustainable than the large industrial factories. I did include what do different bugs taste like? Sorry. But I did include the emissions aspect of it because the industrial farming is probably what the United States would lean towards anyway. That is not what I agree with, but it is less of a detriment to our environment to practice it. So I think in theory, it would be great to have them semi-domesticated, but in our reality, in an industrial setting, they would be more sustainable than meat. And I think that's a huge plus for them. And I don't know what the different bugs taste like. I'm so sorry. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Cool, it's my turn. Yes. Awesome. I'm going to share my screen, but you guys, such cool and interesting topics. I'm like ready to eat bugs now, and hopefully bugs that were fed with vertical farms too, and at dollar stores, hopefully. Put everything together. Cool, cool. You can see my screen and you can hear me? Awesome. So thanks everyone for being here. It's been really interesting to hear from folks. My name is Tsomo. I'm at Macaulay Honors College with some of the other folks who are here on this panel today. And my paper was about a community service project that's actually happening in life, which is really exciting. And we are putting a solar powered community fridge in the neighborhood that I currently live in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And we're doing that with the Brownsville Residents Green Committee. That's the graphic down at the bottom. That's our logo. Can you all see my mouse when I gesture? Cool. And a tiny bit about the Brownsville Residents Green Committee in general before we get started on this project. Brownsville Residents Green Committee was formed last summer in response to a fracked gas pipeline that's going through Brooklyn right now, which is very dangerous. I've been doing a lot of activism around that. So that's not what I'm going to talk about today, but if you are interested, feel free to reach out and I can provide like so many resources and links and stuff. But what we're talking about today is the community fridge that BRGC is working on. So a community fridge is a fridge that is plugged in at a public place. It's usually outside. And anyone who wants to can donate food in, and anyone who needs food can take food out. So it's as simple as that. This image on the left is the only other community fridge in Brownsville. It's located actually at an aquaponic farm in Brownsville called University, and they're one of our like kind of mentors. So we've been really thrilled to work with them. So what do you need to make a community fridge project happen? This is the one at University again. Ours is not up and running yet, which is why I'm using images from theirs. Obviously, you need a refrigerator. That's number one. Number two, you need a source of electricity. So a lot of times that's a small business, a church, somewhere you can plug into an outlet. Some people run extension cords from inside to outside. Ours is going to have a backup power source, but we're also utilizing solar panels. And then you also need to do outreach. That's so that people know that the fridge exists. so that you have consistent sources of food that can be from just neighbors who have extra groceries and want to donate into the fridge, or it can be from like a more formalized food distribution place. So a lot of the churches around this neighborhood do food distribution. Obviously, people have been doing more of that since COVID hit. And so we utilize that, make those connections, and people who are doing food distribution would then give into the fridge. And then you also need outreach for volunteers, because when you're doing this kind of project, you are protected by the Good Samaritan Act for liability purposes, because you're not a restaurant or anything, it's just a fridge on a sidewalk. So we need to make sure we have volunteers that go every day to maintain it, make sure the food is okay, throw out spoiled things, clean it up, and whatever. And if you want more information about how to start a community fridge, there's this website, freedge.org. That's free fridge, portmanteau, very clever. And that has tons of information. And you can also just Google how to start a community fridge, and there's so much information online. So now about Brownsville specifically, this is the neighborhood that I live in, but I have only been here for like just little reflexivity moment. I've only been here for about 4 years, and I've only been organizing here for less than 1 year. So if you want to know more about Brownsville, I'm going to give information at the end of the presentation about the Brownsville Residents Green Committee, and that's mostly people who have been here their whole lives. So those are the folks you really want to talk to. But Brownsville is in Brooklyn. It's community board district 16, the arrows pointing there. And some just context about what Brownsville is like. It's 99% people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color here. It's like 70-something% Black, 20-something% Latinx, and then there's like 1% Asian, 1% white. And we know that race and class are heavily correlated. And so the median income is $37,000 annually. And then these factors of race and class, they affect health. So Brownsville has the lowest life expectancy of any neighborhood in New York City, which is really shocking. And when you compare it to the Upper East Side, which is a neighborhood which is notoriously very wealthy and very white, is an 11-year difference in how long folks are expected to live, which is it's very stark and heavy. And so again, the point that I'm trying to make here, race and class, they're not just social concepts. They have very material effects on health, and that's shown in the life expectancy, how long folks are predicted to live based on neighborhood. And then how does Brownsville and this kind of race and class situation relate to food in particular? So almost a third of residents in Brownsville are food insecure. The ratio of bodegas to supermarkets is 15-1. Carlo's presentation set this up really well, how like food and access and food deserts are related to race and class. And he set up really well, bodegas often have a lot less produce than supermarkets. So it's like those, I don't remember the exact term, but like fast satiating, or like something of that nature, where it's fast foods, you get a lot of calories, but then it's not actually like fueling your body, making you healthy. So that's food in terms of the environment, but there's also other environmental things like air quality. So Brownsville has an 8.0 level of particulate matter. And particulate matter is the most dangerous air pollutant, and it's 0.5 more than New York City's average. So there's all these disparities. Whenever I was researching this neighborhood, it's just so clear again and again and again, the disparities come up. And so when we talk about health, especially around food, a lot of the narrative is like, oh, you're not healthy? Well, have you tried being vegan? Have you tried eating all organic stuff? And I argue that it's really not just about individual choices. It's much more about the environment. Your environment informs what choices you have available to make. And just a little bit more on these health disparities and how the environment in particular impacts health. Brownsville has the highest adult asthma rate in all of New York City. And it also has the highest concentration of public housing in the entire country. So this is just more examples of how environmental stuff really does impact people's bodies. It's a heavily industrial area. Historically, there are a lot of factories, like many neighborhoods that are not invested in by state and local governments. There's not much green space. And also NYCHA, which is the public housing authority in New York, notoriously doesn't take good care of the tenants there. The regulations are very poor. So that kind of indoor and outdoor air quality creates conditions for people to have high asthma rates. And so this is just one example, asthma, that's one like case study of one sickness, but it speaks to larger forces of systemic oppression, right? We've outlined how race and class interacts with Brownsville, and now also how the state has failed to mediate these oppressions enough to make sure that people don't get sick, right? The state has failed to provide enough food resources so that, you know, Brownsville is not food insecure. So all of these unmet needs create illness. And I put the very recognizable COVID image just to emphasize even things like COVID, which is a novel virus, it has hit Brownsville and lower income communities and Black and Indigenous communities so much harder because of like underlying conditions, which are the result of all these systemic oppressions. Okay, so that was a lot of heavy stuff, but now we'll talk about some of the solutions. So fridges, as I was saying, community fridges, they're based on this idea of take what you need and give what you can. And basically that's what the concept of mutual aid is. It's undergirded by this concept of solidarity rather than just charity. So instead of a charitable organization giving to this community and it's like an arrow that points in one direction, it's an arrow that points in both directions because it's neighbors giving to each other. You're giving back. Because a lot of times charity is contingent on somebody who is resourced or an organization that is powerful deeming another community as worthy, and that can be removed at any time. But if you're helping out your neighbors, you're not just gonna like close the door on your neighbors because you're neighbors. So that's kind of how it works. And then in the background is a map of the community fridges in New York City. Last time I checked, there were 108, which is really cool. And this has happened so much during the past year as a response to the economic fallout from COVID. People are suffering, people don't have enough to eat. This has been the amazing response. But you can see that it's mostly concentrated in these areas, at least in Brooklyn. It's a lot in Bushwick, in Williamsburg. And when you look at Brownsville, which is over here, there's only this one. And that's the one at University, which I showed you images of before. The location we're gonna put ours in is over here by Linden Boulevard, really close to where I live, which is all the way on the other side of Brownsville. So this continues to speak to the lack of investment. You know, in neighborhoods that have less resources, it's harder to put resources in sometimes, even if the need is greater. And then one other note on mutual aid. So we had to raise money because we're using solar panels. And unlike just getting a donated fridge, you can't really get donated solar panels in the same way. So we raised money through GoFundMe. And one thing that made me happy about that, not only did we meet our goal within like 48 hours, but it's the concept of it being crowdsourced, another form of mutual aid, people giving small donations, and making its way through our networks of friends and social media rather than like a large grant. So that even from the visioning of the project has come from mutual aid. So that made me happy. And then important to note that mutual aid is not a new thing. It didn't just pop up since COVID. There's a radical history of mutual aid and organizing, and it often happens in moments of crisis. Right now we're going through COVID, but in the civil rights movement in 1969, the Black Panther Party started the free breakfast program to feed school children. And this is another really clear example of state failure to serve people, protect people. And so it's the people taking their needs into their own hands and providing. And I love this image. I think it's so cute. And then, so I mentioned that we use solar panels, and I also mentioned the air quality in Brownsville. So our using solar panels is an attempt to not exacerbate the poor air quality that we already face in Brownsville. And then it brings me to this really interesting point. There's a misconception that often marginalized folks don't engage with environmental issues, right? And so we think about, why is that? If you think about someone who is working 2 jobs and trying to provide for a family. And I always think of the image of them walking down the sidewalk and there's like a canvasser who's like, hey, sign this petition to like save an endangered species in some other country, right? It feels really far removed. And so that person having to face so many struggles day to day, it's not going to feel connected to them. So we need to make sure that environmental issues are framed as environmental justice that is people-centered. Of course, we care about other species being saved as well, but if there's a human focus and a local focus on environmental justice, then it intersects with all these other issues. It intersects with public health. It intersects with racial justice. It intersects with all these other things. Did I get a time check? I did. Okay, cool. I'll wrap up. And so brings me to the point that renewable energy, the solar panels and all kinds of, it's not just solar, this is one example for our fridges, but renewable energy leads to public health. Math is not my strong suit at all, but I did do some calculations just showing how the potential public health savings by using solar panels. And this image is from a similar project. It wasn't on a community fridge, but something that my sister actually worked on in North Philadelphia with an organization called Serenity Solar, where they helped local folks solarize their block, which was really cool. And so a last note is that a Green New Deal or moving to renewable energy, it has to center marginalized communities. It has to center communities of color, and it has to center lower income and middle income communities, because those communities are the folks who are going to feel the impacts of the climate crisis first and worst. And so a just transition to a sustainable future, it has to include us. And this is one of the preliminary designs for our solar panel fridge on the left. One of the designs that we pulled from to actually hook up solar to the fridge. And this is the Brownsville Recreation Center where our fridge is going to be located, which is really exciting because there's always folks hanging out over there. I used to go there. It used to be my gym before COVID. I don't think we have time for this, but finally, just in closing, if you want to keep updated when the fridge gets built, you can follow Brownsville Green on Twitter and Instagram. If you feel compelled to donate, of course, there's no pressure. But this on the left is the GoFundMe link. We actually did realize, I just had a meeting earlier today where I realized we need more money because we have to put in a fire safety unit that we didn't realize at first we needed, and some money for painting and stuff. And then if you want to donate to BRGC and all the amazing work they're doing fighting against environmental racism and, you know, bringing the Green New Deal to Black and Brown communities, you can donate here at PayPal. And I will put those links in the chat as well. And thank you so much. I'll take questions now.
Go ahead. There were 3 people that had a question, so go ahead, Greta, why don't you go?
Oh,
or were you clapping?
It was a but
I'm sorry.
Amazing presentation.
Yeah, really very good job. I've been really, it's been so inspiring to hear everybody's presentation and seeing the energy and love and brains that are going into creative solutions for really challenging problems. So bravo. So a question for Anna?
Yeah, Anna, do you know if there are any organizations like that are popular that are putting in investments in community fridges, like partnering, trying to address this problem that's obviously tied to racial equity in the country?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and they're all hyper local too. So like our neighboring neighborhood, East New York, there's East Brooklyn Mutual Aid, there's Bushwick Mutual Aid Initiative, and it's not necessarily only community fridges, but just like sometimes grocery deliveries, sometimes people give out clothes and stuff. Large scale organizations I know less about, but I know more about just like my community gardens that I live really close by. I don't know what cities the other colleges are located in, unfortunately, so I'm not able to speak to that as much, just New York. But if you ever come visit New York or Brownsville, yeah, Sunrise Movement's really cool. Then I can give you a lot of connections. I hope that answers your question.
And I'm not sure if you mentioned this in the presentation, I may have missed it, but what's your plan for stocking the fridge? Like, have you reached out to any local grocery stores or like larger franchises about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a really important question. One of the things I didn't mention as much in my presentation is just like, we're trying to follow the principles of community organizing. And one of those principles is sustainability, not just like I was saying, a charitable organization coming in, being like, this is what you guys need, and then leaving. So we want to avoid that. So two things. One is I'm telling my neighbors about it. For example, my neighbor right next to me he's retired and he goes to a food bank all the time. So he's going to put in food because that's just like part of his routine. But then we also reached out to East Brooklyn Mutual Aid, University, a bunch of organizations, and also my local community garden that do food distribution already, so that we can make sure that that gets into the fridge consistently. Am I sure that it's going to be enough and like meet the need? No, I'm not sure, but we're going to do the best that we can to make sure that the fridge is stocked.
Kelsey had a question.
Hi. So first of all, that was an awesome presentation. That's a really exciting idea. One thing I was wondering about, so I a couple of times have done a homeless outreach thing in Boston, where we just go out and talk to people and get to know them. And somebody was saying how they got some sort of food item, but then couldn't prepare it because they didn't have like a microwave or any of that stuff. So then I was like, it'd be really interesting to do some sort of like outdoor kitchen. Have you encountered anybody doing anything like that? Do you think that's something feasible to have, like in addition to a fridge, maybe like a stove and a microwave next to it? Or do you think that's probably too complicated? I don't know. It just sounded.
That's a really cool idea, which I haven't actually thought about before. I don't know if a full kitchen outside is doable, but a microwave maybe could be. And this is definitely something that's come up before. Like when we ask folks to donate, we want produce because produce is healthy, but we also want like prepaid or prepared meals. So there's a culinary arts school in Brownsville that we connected with, who's going to donate some of their extra meals at the end of the day, so that folks can go in if they don't have a kitchen. There's a lot of folks that live in shelters who don't have access to a kitchen, would still be able to access that. But I'm gonna talk to people and see if we can get leads on if anyone has that kind of resource here. Really cool idea. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Just realized we're slightly over time, sorry. But if, I don't know if people want to put their emails in the chat in case they want to follow this up with any particular individual, because it sounds like there's a lot of good dialogue between people. You know, I'd also really encourage you to consider, if this is part of a larger paper, to consider submitting to Illuminate, NRHC's undergraduate research journal, because we had a lot of excellent ideas. And so there'll be emails that'll be sent out after the conference telling you where to sign up. So I hope that you consider submitting your work. Can we have one more round of applause for everybody? Very nice. What a nice way to end the afternoon presentations. So I don't know if you heard, but there are going to be some activists that are going to be speaking later. There's going to be an 80s dance party later if you like dancing. And we hope you'll join us tomorrow morning to hear some more great student presentations and join us as we give the various awards for the year. So thank you all very much. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.